All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so excited to be here with all of you tonight, both virtually and in person, to celebrate the brand new book with sprinkles on top. Everything vanilla people and their kinky partners need to know to communicate, explore, and connect. This book is, much requested and much needed in our communities. So I know that we got a lot of folks watching who, just from talking to folks in our communities, they've been looking for a book like this. So we're really excited to have this resource. We're here tonight with the author, Stefani Goerlich, in conversation with Sherrod DeGrippo. And I'm going to introduce Sherrod first. Sherrod is a prominent figure in the cybersecurity community, and her work has overlap with sex tech and digital safety for couples. Sherrod is Director of Threat Intelligence Strategy at Microsoft. She was selected as Cybersecurity Woman of the Year in 2022 and Cybersecurity PR Spokesperson of the Year for 2021. Previously, she was VP of Threat Research and Detection at Proofpoint, where she led a global team of threat researchers, malware reverse engineers, and threat intelligence analysts. Her career in cybersecurity spans 19 years, with prior roles including leading Red Team services at Nexum, Senior Solutions Engineer for Symantec, Senior Security Consultant for SecureWorks, and Senior Network Security Analyst for the National Nuclear Security Administration. She was a frequently cited threat intelligence expert in media, including televised appearances on the BBC News and commentary in the Wall Street Journal, CNN, New York Times, and more. Having presented at Black Hat, RSA Conference, RMISC, BrunchCon, and others, Sherrod is a well-known public speaker and a bon vivant who advocates for living life to the fullest. In her personal time, she spends time with her rescue dog, Boris Karloff. So welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here. And the person of the hour is Stefani, who has been called one of the world's leading experts in working with gender, relationship, and sexually diverse folks, particularly those who identify as kinky. She literally wrote the book on kink affirming mental health care and is a highly sought after public speaker and educator. An AA sect certified sex therapist and board certified sexology diplomat, Stefani has worked with high risk young people, commercial sex workers, and survivors of human trafficking. Licensed in Michigan, Ohio, Arizona, and Florida, she currently runs a boutique private practice in Metro Detroit, where she offers sex, relationship, and mental health therapy to members of the GSRD community, their partners, and their families. Stefani's insights into the lives and health of erotic minorities have been featured in media ranging from the BBC and the New Yorker to Teen Vogue and Cosmopolitan. She earned a master's in social work from Wayne State University, where she specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy, completed her postgraduate certificate in sex therapy at the University of Michigan, where she is on the teaching faculty of the Sexual Health Certificate Program and holds a PhD in clinical sexology. She's the co-founder and co-host of Securing Sexuality, a podcast and conference focused on educating therapists and everyday listeners about issues at the intersection of intimacy and technology. So welcome, Stefani. We're so glad you're here. And we're so glad that everyone is here watching with us virtually and here in the store. We want to let folks know you can ask questions at any time. If you're watching virtually, just pop them in the chat. And for our folks here, if you have a question, when the time comes, I'll bring a microphone to you so that everyone can hear you. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and kick it over to Sherrod and Stefani. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, ER.
Yay!
That was awesome. And a lot of those things are things that I don't necessarily have a lot of detail on. So the first thing I want to know is, what's a sexologist? What is a sex therapist? What is the difference? What are those things?
Okay, good question. So sexology is the academic study of sex. And sexology is not typically its own discipline, meaning most schools are not going to let you major in sexology. Most sexologists are researchers working in other disciplines like psychology, social work, sociology, anthropology, and they specialize in the study of sex. And that's an important distinction because a sex therapist is a qualified mental health provider who has additional training in human sexuality and relationships. So for me, for example, I had to be a fully licensed master social worker before I could apply to my sex therapy training program. And everybody in my cohort was the same. You can't have your limited license. You can't be working towards license. You have to be already an independent clinician. And then you can do anywhere from 2 to 4 years, depending upon your program, of additional study in human sexuality, sexual development, sexual relationships, intimacy, gender. And after that, you can call yourself a sex therapist, although most end up pursuing certification, which then requires supervision on top of all of that. So
That's an exhausting amount of school and certifications and work. So let me ask you this. What do you mostly spend your time on?
I mostly spend my time on BDSM and kink.
Like engaged in them?
Well, but engaged in the academic study of. And when I say academic study, I mean, I work with my clients and I do a lot of writing and research and education for other clinicians around the BDSM community. So I'm not like, Jane Goodall in the jungle, but like at a dungeon. I'm not like secretly hiding in a corner and watching kinksters. I'm working with them. I'm providing clinical services to them. And then I'm also conducting independent research, staying abreast on the latest research done by others, and integrating all of that into my education that I do with other clinicians, teaching them how to work with kinky clients.
So if you were to recommend a source for maybe somebody who's not necessarily as well-versed in this world, they've got your book, so they've started there. Where should they go next? Or where could they look online immediately to get more information?
So I usually tell people to avoid online for the most part.
Okay.
Because a lot of people you can post anything on the internet.
No, it's like, don't Google your sore throat.
Exactly. It's possible to be wildly misinformed, especially if what they're looking at is porn. A lot of people get their kink education from like Pornhub or one of the tubes, and then they're wondering why their partners are like, oh my God, what are you doing right now? So we want to avoid porn as an educational source. Not avoid porn in general. It's fine if you want to watch it for enjoyment, but don't watch it to learn. I encourage people to find their local community. And admittedly, the best way to do that is to start online. FetLife is a great resource to use as a community like bulletin board. You can go on there and you can find your local community. But from there, log off. You don't need to spend a lot of time on the sites. Find your local resources, show up, attend meetups, attend coffee dates, go to munches, go to classes, and learn from the people around you. That's the most safe and organic way to do that and to start that process.
Okay, awesome. I have kind of made the analogy in the past that porn is like haute couture on a runway. Like it's inspiration. It's not something that you need to emulate exactly because those are specialists. Those are pros.
Yeah, I love that analogy. In sex therapy, we'll compare it to the Olympics, right? There's like the gymnastics that you learn when you take the class in like middle school and you like learn your tumbling. And if you're really good, you might learn how to do a cartwheel without breaking your neck. But then there's like the Olympic gymnasts that are doing 17 flips across the floor. And that's porn.
They have a different kind of training.
Absolutely.
So the book is called With Sprinkles on Top. I want to understand in context of the themes of the book, what does With Sprinkles on Top mean?
So I work a lot with what I call mixed desire couples. Some of them would actually say that they are mixed orientation couples. A lot of kinky people will tell you that, their kink affinity is as much a part of who they are as their gender identity or their sexual orientation. It is a part of them. But not everybody feels that way. So instead of saying mixed orientation in the book, I went with mixed desire, meaning, I desire something that maybe my partner doesn't, or I want more of it than they do. And because I work with mixed desire couples, a lot of times one of them is significantly less kinky than the other. And they often come in feeling like it's an insult or a bad thing to be labeled vanilla. they carry a lot of sort of like the opposite of kink shame, where they're like, oh my God, I'm so boring, I'm so bland, I wish I weren't vanilla, I'm so vanilla. And when in the before times, before COVID, I had a bricks and mortar office, I actually kept the King Arthur cookie cookbook in my office. And the minute somebody went, oh my God, I'm so vanilla and I really wish I couldn't be, but you know, it's just who I am, I would pull out the cookie cookbook and I would tell them to flip through and find any recipe that didn't require vanilla.
Oh, I love that.
And you know, that's my approach, is my sort of philosophy is that vanilla, when we talk about it in relationship contexts, tends to mean we're talking about love and affection and connection and reciprocity and concern and eroticism and passion. And kinky people want all of those things too. Vanilla doesn't mean like anti-sex or unsexual. It means they want love and romance and cuddles and all of the things that we traditionally think of. And so do kinky people. They just add to it. So instead of, in my practice, trying to convince one person or the other that they should try and change who they are, I really want my vanilla clients to lean into their kink identities, but be open to the idea of maybe enhancing it. And the
Like
metaphor,
adding some sprinkles. on
adding
top.
some sprinkles.
I love that.
And sprinkles make things pretty, and sprinkles decorate, and sprinkles enhance. So there's all different kinds of sprinkles, but what they don't do is change the fundamental nature of what they're put on. They don't change the flavor. They don't change the texture. They make what you already are a little bit brighter. And that's my goal for my vanilla clients, is to help them be a bright, vibrant, happy, enthusiastic, creative, expansive version of vanilla.
I love that. And I actually really love sprinkles on my ice cream. I'm kind of famous for just dump those things on there. I think they actually taste pretty good.
Okay.
And I also like the idea that sometimes you want a little, sometimes you want a whole bunch of them, sometimes you don't want any at all. It's one of those things that's kind of up to your personal preference, how you want to do it. So you mentioned mixed desire. I saw some people online talking about the book, and they said they called it mixed interest, which I think is also a good term. So the mix is kinky and vanilla,
Yes.
and you just use those terms a bit. What is kinky? What is vanilla?
Okay. So the best way to understand them is in relation to each other, right? So I'm going to start with kink. I always explain kink as being anything that is unusual for its place and its time. And I think that's really, really important, because social and sexual and relational norms change over time. And things that might have been wildly taboo in the Victorian era are totally normal and mundane now. I give a talk on the history of cybersex, and my favorite piece of sex tech of all time is the mailbox. When the mailbox was introduced in London, people flipped out, because for the first time ever, people, especially young people, could communicate without a chaperone. They could write a love note to somebody that they weren't supposed to be writing love notes to, and it didn't need to be hand delivered by a footman or go with a governess. There was no intermediary, and that was shocking and scandalous, and they were convinced that the mailbox was going to lead to the downfall of civilization. And now people are like, there's nothing sexy about a mailbox.
Now, wait, you know I love the mail.
I know you love the mail. That's part of why I picked this, but it's also true. And so I love the mailbox as an example of how things can change over time. So kink is something that is unusual for its time, but we also have to think about place too, because culture isn't a monolith, and things that are really normal in one place might be very different in another. In America, you know, sort of like the monogamy is very the norm. Monogamy is kind of the default expectation, but that's not true in other cultures or in other places. And even when we say that, people tend to say, oh, well, you know, there are places where you know, people can have multiple wives, but there are also cultures where women can have multiple husbands. So kink is anything that is not typical for where you are and when you are, and that does change over time. So then by default, vanilla is the things that are generally aligned with, the things that are pretty much expected, typical, normal for your place and time. And that doesn't mean boring, and it doesn't mean not sexy or not playful or not fun. It just means that it doesn't fall outside of what is typical for their place and time.
So that's vanilla. That's kinky. Also in the book, you use the word fetish. So can you sort of give us the basic definition for layman's on what fetish is?
Yeah, a fetish is a strong sexual desire, or even really a preference for something that is not typically sexualized in our time and place. So if I had a client that were to tell me they're a total like butt guy, right? Like they want a partner with a great butt. They're not really going to be super turned on by somebody that doesn't have a great butt. I am not, as a therapist, going to be going, oh, well, you clearly have a fetishistic disorder, because it's pretty acceptable within our culture. I mean, butts are a sexual thing for us. If somebody were to tell me, I really have a really hard time achieving an orgasm unless I can lick my partner's elbows, or unless I'm wearing knee socks, that would be closer to a fetish, because it's not something that's typically sexualized in our culture.
That makes me think of a scene that's it's a split second in the classic film Secretary, which I'm sure you've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie Gyllenhaal, James Spader, she is trying to explore her sexuality, and there's a montage of various things that she's doing with different people, and one of them is in a kitchen, a giant stove with 5 pots of boiling water on the stove, and she's chained to the stove, and or a person is chained to the stove, and she's throwing tomatoes at them, and she's sort of like, this isn't really for me, but it's clearly for the other person enjoying it. So the elbow licking, I don't know that that's that unusual. I'm sure that someone somewhere has heard it or said that. So
I guarantee you.
So that's fetish, that's kink. Let's talk about mixed interest or mixed desire couples.
Okay.
Because I think that's something you really specialize in. You've talked to me about that personally many times.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite populations to work with.
Well, I have a lot of questions about it.
Lay them on me.
So, I mean, somebody comes in and says to you, my partner is just not into what I'm into. I want him to be into what I'm into. What do I do?
Let me ask you this. Are we doing couples work, or am I working with them individually?
I can't get couples too complicated for me right now. I'm really dealing with
one-on-one. I encourage my clients, when they want to broach the subject of something with their partner, to do it in kind of I'm going to say a third-party way. I understand why people would want to just sit down and be like, I love elbows, and I really want to share my passion for elbows with you, and I really hope that if I win you over on this, you too will be just as passionate about elbows as I am. And that can be difficult, because you're talking about your desire, you're talking about you're sharing something very vulnerable about yourself, and if your partner doesn't respond well, it's really hard not to feel that and experience that as a personal rejection.
No, it's very scary. I'm terrified just listening you describe it.
Absolutely. And then the flip side is, if you're the person whose partner's coming home from work and being like, I need to tell you something really important, and I've been thinking about this for a really long time, and I'm really nervous about what you're going to say.
And I talked to my therapist about it. That's a scary one.
So now already, like, the foundation for this conversation is like, they probably think they're going to get broken up with.
Mm-hmm.
And instead they're like, what do you mean you're into elbows? Do you want me to do that? Like, wait, I know nothing about this. Why would you think I would be into that? And so we personalize it too quickly, because it very rapidly becomes, I'm sharing something very vulnerable about myself, and the other person going, they're asking me to do something I've never even thought of or heard of before. And it can be very scary because it's so personal so quickly. So what I usually encourage people to do is to find something that is maybe erotic, but I try to steer them away from porn unless watching porn together is already a part of their relationship. But find something that features whatever it is you want to talk about. A movie, you mentioned Secretary, a podcast, a video, a sexy story, and share that with your partner and say, I found this, and it really like made me feel like kind of warm and fuzzy, and I like kind of turned me on a little bit, and I want to share it with you. And then you can talk about that. What did you like about that? What surprised you? What did you see that made you curious? And you're able to introduce the idea in a way that's not making it about either one of you quite yet. And so, if you find this sexy elbow short story online and you're like, I just want you to read this and tell me what you think, then your partner has the option to come back and be like, I mean, the writing style was pretty dumb, but I was okay with the subject. I wonder if there's a better version of the story out there. Or I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but reading it kind of being eroticized, it made me think of something. And so then you can say, well, I wonder what it would be like to try that. Or would you ever be open to experimenting with that? And so you're able to have a conversation about this here, not about you and me. And doing that can feel honest, but also a little bit safer.
So it sounds like treat it like getting into a hot tub. Go slow, get in slow, ease on into it.
Ease on into it.
So let me ask you this. What do you do when one partner has a very specific preference, very specific interest, very specific desire, and the other partner says, yeah, I'm into anything, whatever?
I mean, that can be great because if they're into anything, whatever, that means that we can get really granular and really specific and they're not going to reject it out of hand. I would rather somebody say, I really love seeing a woman in knee-high socks, but they can't be any socks. So they have to be like the 80s gym class, like white ribbed with the yellow and blue stripes. And if they're not that,
Lisa
like,
from Weird Science.
exactly.
Yeah.
If it's not that, like if it's like knit, like boot socks, it's not going to do it for me. It's got to be really specific. I would rather a partner be like, yeah, okay, I don't care. Sure, stripes, no stripes, whatever. Buy the socks, I'll put them on. That is so much easier to work with than, oh my God, socks? Like, why are you talking about that? That's so, like, I would rather them come from the yeah, whatever place because at least we can get the need met while we're getting everybody on the same erotic page.
Okay, so take care of the needs and then maybe develop it further in various directions that make sense.
Yeah, and it's okay if you stay in that place of not my thing, but I'm happy to do it for you. Dan Savage talks about, like good giving and game. I talk about that a little bit in the book. And that's an important place to be. You don't always have to be just as into it as your partner, but if you're game, that can be enough a lot of the time. One of sort of the OG sex therapists, his name's Barry McCarthy, and he works a lot with older couples. And he talks about this idea of good enough sex, that maybe it's not the most passionate you've ever had. Maybe you're not feeling it as if it were Valentine's Day, the year you turned 18, but you love your partner. It's a lovely evening. You're not opposed. And you're pretty sure that if you started kissing, touching, caressing, that you would warm up. And sometimes good enough sex is a really nice place to be.
It's like the pizza analogy.
No such thing as bad pizza.
There's no such thing as bad pizza,
I would
you want to heat it up a little, maybe.
Yeah, and there can be bad sex. But if you are with somebody that you trust and that you care about, there can be okay sex.
What would you say to someone who said, I don't know if I'm kinky or not?
I think that's actually most people. We do not have a system in America to give people what I call an erotic vocabulary. We are taught in school, sex ed is human reproduction. Kind of starts with puberty, ends with menopause, and is entirely focused on fetal development. Mm-hmm. If you're lucky, you might get some education about how to prevent an unwanted pregnancy, but you're not going to be taught about pleasure. You're not going to be taught about the full spectrum of sexual possibility. So there's a huge number of people that don't know what they like, don't know what they're into, and wouldn't have the words to describe it if they did, because it's like going to a restaurant and saying, okay, well, it's time to order. What do you want? You would look at them, but you never brought me a menu. Like, I don't know what you serve here. Can I have sushi? Can I have pasta? Like, what are the choices? So with a lot of my clients, we just start with that educational piece. We start with, what is even within the realm of erotic possibility, and how do you feel about that? And then we hone in on the things that make them curious or intrigued.
That's something I actually really love about the book. I read the book mostly today on the plane.
Wow.
And I did my best. I really did. And it's so great because it's very wide on so many different topics. So someone who said, I don't know if I'm kinky or not, I would tell them, read the Sprinkles on Top book, understand what kinky is and what it could be first from a really kind of expository point of view and then decide what you like, because I do think it's almost menu style, like you're saying in the book, of explaining pieces of things that people might not already know. And there was a lot in there that I kind of didn't know, and I thought I was pretty smart. So something that I've done as a weird hobby for the past several years is I've kept a list of Gen Z sex trends. I know that's weird, but it actually is true. I've kept that list for several years based on just kind of like the social media zeitgeist about what that generation talks about sexually, what they find attractive. Something that I have been, or I'm Gen X, what I've been horrified and freaked out by, because apparently I'm very uptight, is they love spitting in each other's mouths. And I'm sure you've heard this. It's very, spitting in their mouths is very popular. I find it unpleasant. It makes me think of hepatitis. Or, I don't like the spitting.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what we were talking about before. Things come in and out of taboo.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's 2023. What are some things that you've seen coming into the mainstream that seem like people are just kind of like, yeah, he spits in my mouth?
First of all, that's valid. There is sort of a witticism or a slogan within the kink community: your kink's not my kink, but your kink's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to like the spitting, and other people can, and we can all coexist in whatever saliva related world we create for ourselves. But in terms of things that are becoming mainstream, and this is where the idea of like porn as education becomes concerning. One of my colleagues, Debbie Herbenek, is at in Indiana University, and she has been publishing a lot of research recently on college students and choking.
That's on the list too.
Yeah.
Choking is huge.
Yeah. And I mean, you can talk to like hardcore 24/7 MS leather daddies from the 70s, and they'll be like, oh my God, no, breath play, no.
There's absolutely a generational piece to it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And something that was considered extremely high risk edge play. And to be clear, it is extremely high risk. That's not the part that's being revisited. But the idea that it's edgy and on the margins, even within the world of BDSM. Now, when I guest lecture, so every semester, I guest lecture for my friend Lori Mintz. She wrote Becoming Cliterate. She's amazing. She's also an instructor at the University of Florida, and she teaches their human sexuality class. And I come in every semester and I do a guest lecture on BDSM and kink. And speaking of trends, I have started to see so many 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are like, I'm totally not kinky. I'm really super vanilla. I mean, I like a little light choking, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And these things that, again, within the world of BDSM are considered very high risk, very edgy, you must be educated, you must know your partner, you must really understand the physiological mechanics of this. Young people are just doing like no problem. And it is concerning because it is high risk. The fact that something has become normalized doesn't make it any safer.
I think that's part of it too, that I noticed, was that the normalization is to the level where it's being portrayed on people's TikToks and Instagrams. They're showing themselves engaged in these things in a very kind of trend-based way.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can cause severe lifelong injury, up to and including death, very quickly. And it's hard to say that these days because, somebody will be like, oh, but I'm really into it and you can't yuck my yum and all this stuff. And I think that there's a difference between yucking somebody's yum and just being really aware of risks. And it has become very popular on social media. It has become very common, but I don't necessarily know that people are getting the information that they need to understand what they're doing when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the biggest trend. I was speaking with a friend of mine for the FBI at the National Center for Victims of Crime National Training Institute. It's a lot of words, in August. And the FBI victim advocates were shocked and were horrified, and they were asking me about the choking. And I said, some people call it foreplay. I call it an enhanced sentencing factor. Like, it really depends on where you land with things. It can go sideways very quickly.
So on that note, then, I feel like we should definitely say if choking is something that you want to explore, it's time to research how to do that safely with your partner and make sure that you both understand.
And I will go a step further and say you really have to understand that there is no fundamental safe way to do it, that you are choosing to do something that is intrinsically dangerous. And if you're an adult and you're consenting, it's not my place to tell you whether you should do that or not. But we need to understand that we're talking about risk awareness and harm reduction, that it's never going to be safe. You just need to be aware that what you're doing is dangerous and go from there. And I think that especially with the younger people that are seeing this on TikTok and other social media platforms,